They wanted CC's, so my daughter took them to CC's for lunch. So they're back. But
Okay.
all right, I see your screens on there. I'm going to wait till right at 1 o'clock. Let me see. Seems like I have someone
No
to
problem.
pay.
I set it to record on the computer, so I've got my sticky note to remember to hit play. So we do
Yes,
record.
I need to do the same thing. Let me check, because one lady, she registered like 3 times and I'm like, I had you on the original. You've been at every program. I guess she was getting worried that she, just now she sent it at 12:12. And so I finally emailed and I said, did you get the email with the link? And see, so, but yeah. Yeah, no, she's the only one that I've got. Let me reply to this email, time sensitive. Okay. 12:58. Okay, all right, out of here. Was waiting on that email to reply. 10:30 would be great. Come on. Okay, there's that. All right, 12:59. I'm going to start letting them in. Looks like we've got about 8. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, from my clock says 1 minute, so we're going to give it 1 minute for those who are still trying to log in and join us, and then we'll get started. Okay, they're just popping in. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I've got 1 o'clock straight up, and I don't know where you're at, but I'm seeing some sunshine today, so I'm excited about that. Haven't even seen a sprinkle today, so hate to say that as being someone in agriculture, because we always need the rain, but I think we've had our fair share for May. So anyhow, it's 1 o'clock. We're going to get started, and I want to thank you for joining us. Some of you have been with us from the very first program, and this is our last one of this series. Gotten a lot of great compliments, so I appreciate that. Sounds like Janet and I are doing what we're supposed to, mainly Janet, because she's the one getting you this information. But anyhow, with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Janet and let her get started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final installment of Unwanted Guests, learning more about your home and garden products. For this event, I'm also going to do one thing. I'm going to stop my video because you really don't need to see me. I want you to really focus on what we're going to talk about today, because it's a lot of information, but it's good information. And we're going to start with my favorite topic, which is integrated pest management. It's how I landed in my job, and I landed in this job because I had a home and I wanted to learn how to take care of things around my home. And I started with those, the landscaping and the friendly plants and stuff, but I also needed to learn how to take care of it. And I knew I didn't want to just spray anything for any reason. And I learned I learned there was a term for that. And the term is called integrated pest management. And it really looks at how do you prevent pests from coming into your home. So when we're talking about that, and we're talking about how do we minimize those pesticides we use around our house, how do we use these combination of best control tactics that allow us to regulate pests, but also try to focus on some type of long-term suppression, depending on what it is, because we all don't like bugs in our home, but be economical, but also practical. Most of this happens with a lot of patience and understanding, because as we talk about this, and there is a philosophy behind IPM, and it starts with inspections, then it goes into identification, knowing what we have, monitoring, which we'll talk about, is trapping, action, then generally this is the chemical part, and the evaluation for you as a, a dweller in a residence is, okay, well, if I don't have bugs in my house, I guess I'm happy, because that's generally how we roll. As long as that's good. And then keeping up with this inspection, because it is a full circle. And sometimes these things do cross as you get more in depth with IPM and pest control in bigger buildings, more than just your home. So we've been talking about a lot of different insect pests. You know, lady beetles can be good, but they can be bad. Snails, slugs, ants. I mean, they're all insects that we've discussed, but remembering that each pest has a life cycle, and in that life cycle, there are weaknesses. And then with most insects, some type of sampling or inspecting really works at trying to make sure that you know what you've got. Then there's the tolerance level. You know, a few ants out on the driveway or the sidewalk, and they're not coming in the house, may or may not need treatment, because again, it's outside, they're not biting, they're not fire ants, they're more like these odorous house ants. Well, okay, that might be a tolerable level. You can also do multiple tactics where maybe we're up by the house, you have some type of preventative control measure versus, you know, out in the yard doing a broadcast. There's lots of different things that are part of this IPM program. So knowing what you have is essential. And these three images represent in a huge spectrum what ants are. Ants in and of themselves are a large social insect class of insects that all behave a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is, based on their scientific names and their orders, these three ants not only behave differently, require different baiting, but also, while they have similarities, they've got a queen, yes, they've got workers, yes, they've got soldiers, yes, they have a brood. They all have that, and that all must be tended. That's why you can use certain things. But knowing which ant you have, the odorous house ant over here on the left, well, she likes a sweet feeding bait. And I said she. There really are no men in the whole ant world. It's ruled by queens. The workers are generally neutral, and or as they mate, yes, there is a male, but once he fulfills his purpose, he dies, and it's female workers. But the odorous house ant, she and her brood prefer sweet stuff. They're the ones that generally are tending your plants. A lot of times they're out there tending plants with aphids as well. Whereas the fire ant, they're a lot different, because they have a stinging and a biting aspect to them. And they tend their nests with ferocity, meaning that when someone gets close, those workers and soldiers send out people, ants, to defend the nest so that they sting you. So fire ants take a different type of bait because they prefer something more in a carbohydrate function. So really, they're not foraging on plants as much as you might see them eat other insects or other things. But you lay down a Frito and they get really, really excited. This carpenter ant Now, the myth about the carpenter ants is, oh, they eat wood. Well, no, they really don't eat the wood. They excavate the wood. In other words, they tunnel it out so that they can put their brood in there, because that's where they prefer to nest. And when they're nesting, yes, they'll tunnel through, soffits or door thresholds. But because of the way they eat, they prefer a protein. So this particular ant prefers a protein bait. The reason I am pointing this out is knowing what you have is 100% essential, because if you call someone, even if you called extension, say, I've got ants, can't help you until I know what kind of ant species you really have. So understanding the IPM pyramid, this philosophy of integrated pest management works on the ground level. Designing or maintaining your yard, your garden, wherever you're at, your dwelling, requires a little thought. What's there? What does draw bugs? What doesn't draw bugs? There's other things around. Then, because this is part of the prevention of it. Or there are physical and mechanical controls. We'll talk about sealing up windows or doors, but if you see daylight under a door, exterior door, and you can stick your finger or a screwdriver or a fork or something, a pest can crawl through, not just rain, but other things. Those biological controls, biological meaning there is something preying on something else, and there's a lot of different things. And then when we get into our chemical controls, what we really talk about is we start talking about toxicity, which is how we're going to round out today's talk. So let's start with the basics, the sanitation and the cultural. Who knew that if you did some house cleaning with your vacuum, or however you can get cobwebs or the dust mites or anything else, and all of these corners sucked up, that would be really a pest prevention method? But it is. Yeah, spiders are spiders, but if you don't like them, the only way, because there is not a structure one that can be sealed up for spiders. So if you don't like them, this is your friend. If not that, they make a device called the Webster. And yes, you can put that in your shopping search engine, Webster. And they're pole devices that you can also do interior and exterior to clean out those cobwebs. Outdoors, raking leaves, and it thinks, oh, well, it's spring and stuff. Y'all, I still see some leaves still hanging around. If you're going to keep them, then either mulch them up, compost them up, something, but don't leave them large like this. And especially if there's been a problem with that plant. In other words, a lot of times we'll tell you, especially if it's a diseased bush and it's got one of the plant diseases, and I'm thinking of photinias right now. Really, if you're not going to compost those leaves, rake them up, make sure, get them in a bag and send them off, because that helps reduce the chance of transmitting that disease, because sometimes this can transmit a lot. It can also harbor a lot of other things as well. So plant selection and mulching. So as you're going through and as you were trying to spruce up your yard and look at things like water leaks, exterior and interior, but especially exterior, a little drip and you're thinking, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Yes, it is. I know. And sealing up areas like this or any place else, because outdoors, those water leaks can also help encourage ants, cockroaches, rodents to come visit. You don't like weeds? Then mulch, and then mulch some more. And the reason I say that it is, this breaks down no matter what. The more you can mulch, the better off you are. And again, planting the right plants in the right location actually helps. Making sure that you keep grass and dirt, and what I mean is not 3 inches away from your foundation, but you below the brick and the concrete slab line. What you want is you want to make sure that you can see between that concrete slab and your brick veneer or your siding or whatever. Reason being is this is the area that you've got to watch for termites. If you have a bunch of mulch, if you have a bunch of bushes, if you have a bunch of vegetation up close against your house, you cannot see that. And that is where the damage is. Damage comes where you cannot see. So making sure drainage, I mean, we have all experienced probably where our yard drains and where our yard doesn't drain. The one thing you do not want as a homeowner is have any water ponding up against your foundation in your home. Ponding up in the backyard, away, somewhere else, fine. But if it's up against your structure, that really weighs on how your foundation will settle, how everything else goes. If I come back up here and let's talk windows and doors, because this is where most of us, these are simple things, and you can always find the window seal stuff, all of that insulation on sale at any of your local stores every now and then. I mean, when you really need it, it's like really expensive. But if you go in, and sometimes like this is the time of year you find the old stuff, maybe it's not, but you get that so that you can make sure that, flying insects can't come in through windows, that spiders don't come in. You'd be really surprised, doors and windows, how much they quote unquote leak. And this is one of the easiest things that you can do to fix your home. And generally most of us can do it. And yeah, there is a YouTube video for that. So now we're going to talk about products and such. And my disclaimer at the beginning, and for those that have joined, I am not endorsing any one product. Everything that you see henceforth is for educational purposes only. I cannot talk about something without showing you, because you'd ask me a question, and it's just easier if we illustrate it. But this is to help you, the listener and viewer, to understand a little bit about what we use around our homes and what you really should be doing to protect yourself, your family, your pets, and the environment. And so first of all, whenever you go to the store, and we talked about this in the first episode about reading that pesticide label. When you get a product, there is always some type of something on the product. When you buy groceries, some of us, I'm guilty because I've been doing this for a very long time, read what's on the label. How many calories does it have, nutrients, that such a thing. But when you go to the big box store and you buy something to kill the ants or the weeds in your yard, do you just pick up what's off the shelf, or do you really know what you're doing? Because ladies and gentlemen, tell me, I will tell you, I read. You have to. So the read the label first is really a law. And what they mean by that is the US EPA, who registers all pesticides in the United States, says that a manufacturer cannot come online and say their product can do certain things without the US EPA saying, all right, here's the information. What does your product say you're going to do? And then we look over it and we say, hey, this really does, this at least meets our requirements. Therefore, this is your label. There is a difference between the label, which is on the product, whatever product container you buy, and whatever is taped to it, affixed to it. Some of these cans literally have it, printed on the sleeve of the can. this particular packaging, I mean, that's the whole entire package. It's like dog food only for pesticides. Even your cleaning products, whatever is there, that is the label. Now you can go to the manufacturer's website and typically find additional information, and that's what we're going to talk about. But you're really supposed to read the label before you buy the product, sell the product, use the product, or dispose of the product. And it's really, really important, because when you're using a product that seems just as innocuous as this, that when the label, and this is an older image. This is about a 15-year-old image. And you'll see in the end of the presentation that even Monsanto changed how they packaged as things progressed. Because in the beginning, it was just this front panel and this back panel. There was nothing that pulled off. It just told me that this is what the product did. However, really, to meet EPA standards now for not just professional use, but for consumer use, the EPA says that there are part of the label that you need to understand. Signal words. What word is on this front product? Precautionary statements. So on the back of the label, back of the product, we'll read about some different statements that say, you know, what you might need to wear, where you can apply, where you can't apply. Directions for use. Well, that is typically always on the back side of the product, and it's generally a fairly good section. Are there other precautions? Are there any personal protective requirements? That is what PPE says, because a lot of people assume that I can go out and work in my yard, and it's Texas and it's summer, and I can dress in my shorts and my t-shirt and maybe some gardening gloves and some shoes, and maybe I've got socks on or my ankle socks. Or if I'm going to apply an insecticide or do some type of really heavy duty work in my garden, then law says, and this is true, label law says for all liquid applications where there could be a potential for drift, aka aerosol or that pump sprayer, you're supposed to wear a long sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes with socks, preferably waterproof type shoes, something that, again, sneakers, again, if you get some of that herbicide or liquid insecticide inside your shoe, well then, and it gets in your sock and it gets on your foot, you're absorbing it in. Same with your legs and your arms. I tell my pest control folks all the time, when you smell something, you are breathing it in. If you are breathing in a chemical contaminant, no matter what it is, and you think it's not that big of a deal, remember, you only have one set of lungs. So EPA tells you, when you look at these products, how you are supposed to react. Because when you see a product that has a caution signal word, what the US EPA says is that slightly toxic or relatively non-toxic, slight potential to harm. In human speak, it means that you can encounter a product that has a signal word of caution, and some may not even have a signal word, and it's still an insecticide or a cleaning product. But depending on how much you use, how much you are exposed. So they really call this the lethal dose of exposure, lethal dose of 50%, LD50. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about something that is a pint to a quart. So if I'm, pint to a quart, and then a pint to a half a cup, I'm, depending on what I'm using, that can mean how much toxicity. That's a lot if you think about it. If you're sitting there with a glass of water in front of you, Typically, your average water bottle, soda bottle is 16 ounces, which is a pint. Warning. Now we start getting into the real scary part. So warning is, a teaspoon to a half a cup. That gets a little dangerous. So they talk about moderately toxic, can cause acute illness, dermal inhalation. So again, you're using something with a warning. And a lot of us did use a lot of things with warning. Like I said, in the beginning of this series, when we were talking about cleaning products, those household cleaners and disinfectants, and they clean the air, come with a warning. And here you're reading inhalation. Well, yeah, because there's also not only an LD50 for dermal, but there's an LD oral, and that has to go with inhalation. So again, little numbers. Doesn't take a lot to make someone sick, especially if it's not in a well ventilated area. Then you pick up a product and the product either has danger, and then if it really is really bad, danger, poison, this has a skull and crossbones on it. Either way, these are highly toxic products. Severe eye or severe skin irritation. In other words, it can cause temporary to permanent blindness. It can cause rashes to burns. It can, if swallowed, it can burn the esophagus going down. These are all. So typically the reason we go over this briefly is to remind you, there are words on these products to help you, and you can think of it like a stoplight: green, yellow, red, go, slow down, stop. So when you see precautionary statements, they'll have things like keep out of reach of children. Well, what does that really mean? Keep out of reach of children. It means that children under the age of, relatively, they say the age of 17, EPA will not give guidance on what is a child. They hold that at your discretion. However, they do say that, since children are not fully developed until they are adults, age 25, then really what they want is, use discretion if you're going to allow your child to be around a pesticide product. So remove contaminated clothing after use. This is a must. If you get something on you, you need to get it off you. Second of all, if it is on clothing, don't wash that clothing, that contaminated clothing, with anything else in your family's wardrobe. Wash that separately. Wash it in hot water. Most of our newer washer machines have got those heavier settings. Do as much as you can to get that contamination out of the clothing. Don't store your products in and around food. That's a common, but it seems common sense, but most people don't put two and two together. And then before you would recycle anything, most of these products, even your cleaning products, say triple rinse the product and then puncture holes in the bottom of the container so that nobody will ever use it as a potential drinking container. So let's talk about some of the non-chemical things that you can do. There are a lot of different traps. This trap here is for Japanese beetles. Over here, you've got like a yellow jacket trap, and you've got these glue board type traps. There's some poison-free traps, and oh yeah, there's some rat traps and some snap traps. And then there's this 21st century device, and it's called the Into Care, and it's a mosquito trap. Now, this is one of those, it's very hard to do as a DIY. I even work with a pest control contractor to come out and service these, because they put in two different types of low toxicity chemicals to draw the female mosquito in here so that she will lay her eggs And the eggs that where they grow are contaminated, and I'll talk about this insect growth regulator later. And then when she lays the eggs, part of what she actually comes in contact with is also a contact insecticide to keep her from actually mating. So this is a really interesting 21st century device, but traps are a way for you to monitor pests in and around your home and your yard and do some low impact things to actually reduce pest populations, especially if you're anything like my yard. It's like, even though I love plants, I do have vegetative areas. And with all this rain, heavens to Betsy. So those biological controls, I was talking about those earlier and said, we've covered these in the last couple of talks, but basically it's using living organisms to control other insect pests. So remember, ladybugs or lady beetles like to kill aphids, soft body insects like scale. Those lace wings, those pretty green bugs with the cute little lace, aphids, scales, spider mites, soft-bodied insects. The predatory mites, they're great for spider mites and other pest mites. They generally use the predatory mites and these tricky grandma wasps, mostly in greenhouses and in their high production facilities. And it's only because, again, it's just the humidity and everything else that goes in some of these places, the spider mites, the white flies, the aphids, the mealybugs, all of that sometimes really can get high just simply because you can't kick the humidity out of some of those high production greenhouses and those tunnel houses because of what they are. All right. So let's talk about products. You go to the store and you're looking at the shelves and you're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Well, you've got different choices. You have these insect growth regulators. You have these botanicals. We have some microbials. We have some baits, some low toxicity inorganics, soaps and oils, and biological controls. So we talked about the biological controls. Let's talk about the chemical stuff. You may or may not know that you've been using an insect growth regulator, but if you've got a cat or a dog and you've either used the spot on or the flea collars and you've had something with methoprene in it, then chances are you've been using an insect growth regulator. If you're trying to deal with fire ants and you really don't want to you want something that's friendly for around vegetable gardens, then this extinguish, which is methoprene as well, is really a low toxicity product. Insect growth regulators work on the larval stage or the young life cycle of an insect, depending on what insect we're doing, because every insect growth regulator works differently for different pests. Fleas are different than mosquitoes, that are different than fire ants, that are different than cockroaches. So the chemical may be the same, but how it works all works on those earlier life stages. So generally there's an egg, and then that first hatch is where we generally want that, because what ends up happening is most of these IGRs, which is what we use actually in the industry, actually goes through and reduces the juvenile stage so that they don't become adults. What I generally tell folks is IGRs are birth control for bugs. They typically work at keeping the juvenile from going to an adulthood so that they cannot reproduce. You cannot reproduce, you eventually just die out because, again, you can't fully function going forward. Botanicals, which a lot of folks have called in the past organic, Um, okay, let me think about this for a second. Botanicals are derived from plants. Some are more toxic than others and referred to as organic and break down in the environment. So what I really want to talk about is what we really talk about in botanicals and as organic. For years, everybody talked about organics. Organic is now a term that is used by the USDA when they are working with agricultural producers to certify them so that when you are in the store as the consumer and you are buying something organic, it means that a third party has looked at how that piece of produce is actually grown, what is in the ground, what is in the product, and that it meets certain standards. Therefore, it's called OMRI, which has to do with the Organic Certification Board. One of those organic products is botanicals coming from nature. So that pyrethrum, that flower that you saw here in this image, which is from India and Africa, well, they found that if you grow that, grind it up, and turn it into a substance, it's very toxic to insects. The problem is it's one of those, you got to hit it to get it in order to get it. If you're not familiar with rotenone, which comes from nature, is very toxic. This actually comes with a danger and a skull and crossbones. It is deadly to insects and it's deadly to fish. There are old ranchers that have used this for years to kill, fish that were in a pond that weren't supposed to be there or whatever. It's not one of the number one recommendations. Nicotine. So nicotine, and the reason I'm bringing up nicotine and pyrethrum especially is at the end, we're going to talk about their synthetic components. But nicotine, while it's toxic to humans, it's also very toxic, especially in liquid form, to insects. Things that we didn't realize, delemonine, oil of citrus, any of those citrus type products, lemon, lime, can be very toxic again to insects, cedar oil. And then there's a whole new chemistry of rosemary, thyme, eucalyptus, geranol, lots of your essential oils that are also botanical. The one thing about botanicals is this: in their true form, they are not long lasting. They break down pretty quick in the environment. Typically, you've got to hit the insect you are trying to get. It doesn't generally do a whole lot of systemic. In other words, you can't put it in the soil and hope that it's taken up in a plant. Rotenone and nicotine are a little bit different, but for the most part, the rest not. Products, there are a lot. I am noticing more and more when I go to the store that you're finding these products, and this was all had the same active ingredient, but one was for fly gnats and fruit flies. The other one was for wasp and ants. There's a variety of products. The Ecozone roach, ant, fleas, silverfish, again, it's just in a powder form. This is actually an aerosol spray, this being a powder, and the Orange Guard, that comes in different spray components ready to use or concentrate and you mix with water. Microbials. So this is an extremely interesting category of insecticides because these come from microbes. And what's interesting about microbials is they are very similar in how they react with insects in the environment as vaccines sort of do. And what I mean by that is finding these active microbes So Bacillus thuringiensis and Beauveria bassiana, yes, they occur in nature, but in order for them to be formulated into something like this, generally they have to change that microbe, aka kill it or attenuate it, and then make it into a format that once this is activated with water, your bird bath, then when the mosquito comes, the female mosquito comes to lay her eggs, they don't lay, because once the eggs come in contact with this Bacillus thuringiensis, they become neutralized. That's generally how that works. Spinosad is another naturally occurring insecticide. It's a byproduct of a microbe. And what we have found in this particular product is that it's usually while it kills insects, and generally it's, again, a hit it more to get it, it doesn't have a long residual life. Therefore, it can be used on a wide variety of insect pests in and around a garden. And I generally focus on this one because a lot of people who are trying to garden and are pulling their hair out about certain insects, these are easy to find. And somebody asked about where you find stuff. If you're not familiar with this company called Amazon, you can find a lot of things on that lovely little website. Not promoting anybody, but it's that, or I put it in a Google search or a Bing search, and voila, things pop up. Baits. So what is a bait? Bait is the food that we feed to these insects with some type of lure, like I was talking about the ants earlier, that allows them to pick up the bait. And because they're social insects, so especially ants and especially cockroaches, feeding them bait, because of their biology, again, knowing thy pest, they take the bait back to the colony and they feed it to everybody else. And once it's in the colony and it's being digested and it's being passed back and forth, there's a term called trophallaxis that talks about how they actually pass things back and forth to one another. But what that actually does is allows the colony to be reduced from the inside out. So things like this liquid ant bait, or this carpenter ant bait, or the slug bait, or things that we even use in rodent bait stations or in our termite bait stations, or even these little disc cockroach bait stations, all of them come with the premise of there is a killing agent mixed with a food attractant specifically for that species. I will tell you right now, carpenter ants won't even go near this stuff. And the odorous house ants that think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread don't like the carpenter ant bait because they don't like the attractant in it. So again, baits are specifically made for specific insects. So the other category that a lot of gardeners, home gardeners like, are called inorganics. Inorganic means there's no carbon chain. Organic, botanical means there's some carbon chain in it. But boric acid, been around for a while. I mean, it's done its duty. Disodium octaborate tetrahydrate, which is a derivative of boric acid. Silica aerogel, and I don't show images of silica aerogel, but if you've ever bought a pair of shoes, phone, computer, handbag, that little bottle of aspirin or something like that, and you see this little shaker with those little beads in it, that is silica aerogel. That stuff is priceless, ladies and gentlemen. It's a desiccant. You can put that out in areas where you're trying to dry out cabinetry or something because of moisture, and that also helps dry out insects as well. And then diatomaceous earth. That really works, but it only works if it's dry. Right now, with all this moisture outside, if you put diatomaceous earth in your out on the ground, it would be deactivated because it's too wet. That's a summer thing. So some of the inorganics that you can buy, off the internet, again, it all comes in this powdery form. So you've got to use some caution when using this. White powder, I don't care who you are, putting out white powder, some people are going to look at you and think, what are you doing? Understand powder can also poof and transfer. Be real careful of that. So again, but these are great applications depending on where you're at. Now, the last low toxicity is soaps and oils. Insecticidal soaps and horticultural oils, dormant oils, are really good at killing small and soft-bodied insects and mites. However, they do have to come in contact with that pest to kill it. So again, it's a short residue. You can make your own soap mixture if you take 1.5 teaspoons of Dawn liquid detergent per 1 quart of water. That really works on, put it in a spray bottle. Works great on things like mud daubers or any flying insect pests that maybe you don't want around, but you don't want anything harmful. I use that a lot, especially because I've got dogs. I can spray, and if the soap water hits the dogs, they just got an extra bath. But the oil is definitely oily, very oily. There are some real precautionary statements. And what I mean by that is making sure that you do wear your gloves, and you want something like a rubber, not a rubber glove, but nitrile glove, chemical resistant gloves. You want to make sure maybe you wear coveralls, because again, it's an oil. It's still going to do its damage. So mode of action. If you want to check out how this really goes down, you can go visit this website. But generally what soaps do is this. And you know this, you just don't know how this works. If you have ever, washed your hands after being cut and there is soap and it gets in a cut and you go, ow, or if you were ever a bad child and lied to your mom and she washed your mouth out with soap, then you may have also experienced when those soap molecules got into that tissue wall, it started to burn. Well, if I'm an insect, because I have a cuticle, and that cuticle is to make sure that I'm protected, but it's also soft. Well, once it starts hitting that cuticle, it starts breaking down and going into death life cycle. I got to speed this up because we've got to get to the herbicides. So the pyrethroids are the synthetic to those pyrethrums. You'll know the products when you go into the market. Generally, it says insect killer. The active ingredient is going to have this THRIN, thrin. It's residual, and what it means by that is it will live in the soil. Okay, it acts on the sodium channels of the insect, which means it can also act on your sodium channels if you're exposed to it too often. It's low toxicity to birds and mammals, but very hazardous to fish. So the labels generally say you cannot use around aquatic areas. Does cause some skin irritation. It's widely applicable, and it's used a lot, especially even in the pest control industry. I mean, you can go to the stores and find all sorts of products with this type of active ingredient. The other active ingredient that is most common is this neonicotinoids. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, remember I said we talked about two naturals, the pyrethrum, which the synthetic is pyrethroids, the nicotine, which is the nicotoids. And this one is out there. There's lots of products. But the reason we bring this up is, while these are good products and really work at killing killing insects that chew on plants, there is a problem with pollinators. But with caution, you can use it. So about 5 years ago, I had to do my math real fast. There was some studies about what they called the colony collapse disorder for bees. And they were really thinking part of it had to do with these neonics being out there and such. And what the US EPA really said was they're not calling it colony collapse. However, the bees that are out in population, once they come in contact with some of these products, these neonicotinoids, the bees can be harmed. So in 20, I want to say 2020, EPA said, look, we've looked into this. We are now saying that if you manufacture one of those neonicotinoid products, your product must have on the label this cute little bee diamond, and whoever is using that product must know that if you are using this product and bees can be harmed, and those bees come in direct application, especially if they are a managed hive, you are in violation of federal law and can be fined. So what this says is, especially to the pest control industry, but you as a homeowner, or maybe you're managing a community garden or know something, if you've got managed hives, you've got to be really, really careful about what products are coming into the garden or being used around there. And they really have said that it's acetamiprid, chlorothiazide, dimethyfuran, imidacloprid, and thiomethazone. Sorry, I cannot pronounce real. They're known for what they're doing, but what they're saying is, again, you can use it, but if you see this, you have to be very careful about using it near food crops and where around non-agricultural sites. I mean, this is tough stuff, but this is one of the things that we have seen change in the last decade about EPA being very firm about products that can possibly harm not just pollinators, but the environment or anything else. We haven't seen this type of thought since the organophosphates and DDT were pretty much eliminated off the market. So before we go, let's chat briefly about herbicides, because we all want that yard, and we've all heard words about this particular active ingredient, glyphosate. This product has been around since the 1970s. It was developed to help with broad spectrum weed control. Okay, it was relatively easy to compound because it was an organophosphorus. There's a difference between organophosphorus and organophosphate, but basically it's a chemical compound. It uses the inhibiting factor that puts the enzymes in the plant into hyperdrive. That's really what this is talking about. In other words, what it does is it helps the plant use up its resources and die. That's what they like about these things. It was manufactured by Monsanto for a number of years, and then when it went off patent, it was made by a lot of others. The interesting thing about this product is, like I said, it's gone through an evolution. Now the newer product that I showed from earlier today is got this front panel label, and then on the back there is another label that you pull out, and these are just part of the sections. But you, the end user, you are required to read over this cover to cover. It's in English and in Spanish now on most of these products. It talks about where to use it, okay, how to apply it, when to apply it. Do not spray plants or grasses you like. They will die. Okay, I mean, when to replant. 1 day after application, lawn grasses, herbs, vegetables, and fruits may be planted 3 days after application. However, you might be a little bit more cautious and say, let me give a week. Let me till my soil. Let me do my other soil prep. But understanding, if you don't read these portions of the label, you're not helping yourself. The other products that we buy off the shelf, and there are several out there, and I really was amazed at how many more are out there nowadays than I really thought there were, is 2 products that can't carry these 2 different active ingredients. One is called dicamba. The other one we shortened to 2,4-D. Dicamba, thank goodness they didn't call it 3,6-dichloral-2-methyl-benzoic acid, right? Is a broad spectrum herbicide. That one's been around since the late 60s. Okay, again, another chlorinated derivative. It's an acid. So what it does is this one definitely makes that plant grow. So it outgrows its nutrient supplies. So Roundup will just kill it and make the plant not sure what it's doing. Dicamba looks at the plant and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to overstimulate you so that you'll just run out of energy and die. 2,4-D, and I am not saying that particular word, is an organic compound. It's a systemic herbicide, again, which selectively kills most broadleaf weeds. So again, that doesn't kill grasses, but weeds. And then it also is one of the oldest herbicides in the world, because 1945, this one came out, right after the war. And a lot of this one was definitely developed because of our growing industrial society, so that we could actually grow more crops. But if you go to the store and you buy this because you're at the store and you're going to get this all-in-one lawn, weed, and crabgrass killer, well, again, you've got another label. And in that label, you've got your directions for use. You've got your quick facts. You've got the most important thing that is on every label is if you have a problem, something gets on you, whatever, every label has this phone number where the manufacturer, by federal law, you have to be able to reach them and ask them questions. If you can't, you can always call Poison Control and they will answer your questions as well. So that was the label. There's another document, and this is a harder document to find, ladies and gentlemen, because this is not something you just go out and get off a lot of these manufacturer websites, unless it's a commercial product. So that bio-advanced weed and grass killer that we were just showing also has this safety data sheet. In the safety data sheet, there are several pages of information that tells us what it is, what EPA registration number it is, what it does, it's a non-selective herbicide, who it's made by, and then are there any hazards? So you're looking at this and it says, well, hazards not otherwise classified, but it's got a danger signal word, and this pictogram, which is this universal, means that it could be somewhat hazardous to some human. Up here it says fertility or unborn child. Then over here it says prevention, if exposed or concerned, get medical advice, store locked up, first aid measures. So this is where this and this come together. If you get it on you or you inhale it or something like that, you're supposed to show the doctor in attendance this sheet. Most people don't keep these sheets with them. If you inhale, get to fresh air. If you get in your eyes, rinse thoroughly. Get on your skin, wash. If you ingest, clean mouth with water and drink afterwards, plenty of water. These sound pretty intense, and you didn't see all that on the label. Other things, what does it look like? Is it stable? Is there any toxicological information? So remember when I was talking about that oral LD50 and that dermal LD50 and that inhalation LC50? Well, that's not on the label either, but on the safety data sheet it is. So if I'm a professional and I've got my pest control license, part of my job is I've got to look at 2 documents in order to know how safe I am. The other thing that these labels also tell you are what are the inert ingredients. Yeah, you'll see the active ingredient, but it will say other ingredients. The only way you ought to see the other ingredients is by looking at these labels. So one more thing before we go. Out there you find products, the Bio Advanced 3-in-1, and the interesting thing about these products is, yes, they're marketed for a home owner who doesn't have a lot of time and is just trying to do 3 things at once. Because really what you're saying when you're doing this is you're putting out the dicamba, but you're also putting out 2 other resources to help make things grow. Well, nothing is going to grow. I mean, if you're trying to kill something, but you're also trying to tell it to grow, and dicamba works on that growing spurt, you may not be doing everything correctly. That's why we said, in the very beginning, talk about your soil and what you're looking at. So understanding products. All right. Because I want to get to your questions. Take a quick shot of these resource pages. Liz will have the handouts with this, but these are our 3 best websites within Texas A&M AgriLife, one being on horticulture, one being on turf, and one being on insects. And especially this hort page, there is a lot of crossover because there's, this is where the master gardeners dwell. So you'll find things on insecticide use. You'll find things that will help you do things at what plants to plant, what you're looking at. Finally, I couldn't do this series without the support of the USDA NIFA. They do support our program in the Department of Entomology. And I cannot thank Liz enough for inviting me to come and speak to y'all. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we will answer questions.
Okay, do you just want to go ahead and look at the chat and read the questions? There are 2 or 3 or so, or do you want me to read them out to you?
Let's see. Okay. The person about the sprinkler, yes. I mean, it used to be we would have these water watcher people that would come out and do that stuff, but just remind them. So where do I buy my 21st century traps? Seriously, it's that online retailer that has Prime membership. But I've also seen stuff literally at Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace Hardware. You'd be surprised. So if you're hiring a company, this is the one thing they have to do by rule is if they're offering you a product and they're going to come out and they're going to say, I'm going to spray your yard with X blah, blah. You can say, I want a copy of that label and the safety data sheet. And if they give you any grief, that is the first indication you don't want them at your home. Because a good company will say, well, sure. And a lot of times they keep them on their phones or on their website. But if not, get them to show you what they're doing, take a picture of it, and then you can go type that product. I kid you not, y'all. You can type just about anything in any search engine and it all pops up.
Mhm.
All right, so treating, here's a good myth. And I'm glad you brought this up because of mosquitoes. What we use for mosquitoes does not harm bees. and it has to do with timing and where they actually spray. For leaf miners, it would be that bio advanced tree and shrub stuff, because leaf miners, leaf rollers, beetles, any of those chewing and sucking pests, the best way to knock them out is to use a systemic. So generally what a systemic is you mix it up and you drench it in the soil and the plant takes it up. And that's pretty good because generally you don't have to worry about too often with your pollinators on that, because what it's going into is in the leaf, and the miners are chewing the leaf rather than where the pollinators are sucking out the nectar out of the flower. And the reason I kept my camera off was you guys really did not need to see all the hand actions that I had for this talk.
Yes, I will vouch for